we would all not be here today if we got sick by touching doors. Now, if you lick doors, it's a different story. But again, ICPT is coming at this from an upstream approach. We're saying, yeah, that's all true. There's nothing wrong with those ideas, and compulsions really do amplify and keep people stuck on this hamster wheel. But there's something that's set in motion, the compulsion, the emotion, and the consequence, which is where the person is living. They're living inside of getting sick and getting their kids sick. So everything they do sounds virtuous. I'm keeping my kids safe. I'm keeping myself safe. I'm following public health guidelines. I get the badge, right? But what set it in motion was an interaction with the door handle that was different than everyone else's interaction with that door handle. So no matter how many ways they try to convince you that what they're doing makes sense, and we therapists get sucked into this story with some frequency, because it does kind of make sense. If you enter into the world of possibilities with them, if you enter into their consequences with them, you too don't want to get sick or get your kids sick. This is why a lot of people avoid doing exposure therapy, because they're afraid, well, I really don't want to put my client in harm's way. But it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We know we're not putting our clients in harm's way. How do we know that? How do we know touching a public door handle isn't going to get us sued? Because we know they're not going to get sick from that door handle in a way that matters. We don't tell our clients to stick their hands inside of a sharps container and then wiggle it around and then tolerate the uncertainty. But touching the elevator button, yeah, why not? And the reason we know this is because we have knowledge about the present moment too. We know that just because germs are invisible, just because there's a possibility, just because I could spin a really good campfire story about the invisible germs that can kill you and your kids has nothing to do with what I know in reality, which is that door handle's fine. Not that there's no germs on it, that it's fine. Gotcha. I debated putting one of these in here because I didn't really want to read the words around pedophilia OCD out loud and on camera. So here we go. It's pretty tame. I'm not John. I'm changing my baby's diaper, and I'm going through all the normal processes of wiping and drying and applying diaper rash cream, and then putting on a new diaper. I know this is standard because I've watched tutorials over and over again on YouTube. I know how to do this. I've even watched my older siblings change their kids' diapers over and over again. But while I'm applying the diaper rash cream, I thought to myself, maybe I lingered on that area. Maybe I didn't need to be lingering on that area. Maybe I rubbed the cream for too long, over too large of an area. Maybe lingering means I wanted to touch them. Maybe I wanted to touch them beyond just cleaning and keeping them safe. This is just atrocious. Why is my mind doing this to me? I love my kids. I would never hurt them. But why did I linger? It seems like something a pedophile would do, lingering, rubbing their child. My heart's racing, I'm sweating, I feel ashamed, I feel anxious. This wouldn't be a legitimate concern if I didn't feel this way, maybe I could dismiss this concern. But the fact that I feel scared maybe means something is real. Maybe this is something I should be concerned with. Maybe I should stop changing my kid's diaper. How many people have heard some story like this? Terrifying. And again, we reduce bewilderment here. We listen to the story. Now, my first interaction with a client who's struggling like this is to reassure the crap out of them that they're not a pedophile, or they wouldn't be here. But we're told to resist the urge because it could be feeding into their compulsive tendencies for needing reassurance. But we know that it's not, or we wouldn't be treating it as OCD, right? So we're all kind of in on it, right? We just don't want to say it because it might be compulsive. And again, the ERP approach would be looking at the compulsions. You're avoiding working with your kid, you're avoiding changing diapers, you're ruminating, all the typical compulsions. They're feeling a great deal of shame and guilt, panic. All of this makes it feel real. And if we do ERP here, you interact with your kid normally, like a good parent. You tolerate the distress. Maybe you tolerate not knowing if you're a pedophile. That one seems hard. And then hopefully habituation or inhibitory learning work, and you at least come to some reasonable interaction with that thought that it's probably not likely, or I don't need to think about it, and I'm just going to work with my kid again, normally. But ICBT comes earlier. It says bathing your child, changing your diaper works just the same. ICBT says the problem didn't begin when the compulsion showed up. It began when you started doubting what you were doing. You knew what you were doing. You were doing everything that you should do to help your kid. You knew what your desire was in that moment, which was to clean and help your kid out of discomfort. The desire wasn't sexual. The desire wasn't manipulation. The desire wasn't to hurt. And then you doubted that. And ICBT is trying to help you understand that there was a before the doubt. There was a moment where you knew you, where you knew your intentions and your desires, and you knew what your senses were telling you, which is the opposite of what OCD was trying to convince you of. So there was a before the doubt, a time where we actually knew, where we had certainty in our senses, in our inner desires, that we then began to doubt. So people with OCD aren't doubting 24/7. People with OCD are doubting in moments where they're provoked. And we're trying to make the case that that doubting shouldn't be. So module 1 is all about reducing bewilderment, making a tangible process for the client and you to follow. And what we're really highlighting is that the problem begins with doubting. The problem doesn't begin with emotions or compulsions. It doesn't begin when you hit a pothole or you touch a door handle. Those are benign. Those are normal experiences. The problem begins with doubting. So then we need to try to figure out what kind of doubting. For instance, I have 4 really big oak trees in my backyard, over 75 feet tall. And they've been there for a very, very long time. And my house is a very small house. It's under 2,000 square feet. So tree versus house, who's winning? I'm in my house, and so is my wife and my cat. I don't want anyone to die. So, if I look outside and I see my oak trees swaying in the wind and the roots are starting to pull up from the saturated ground, and I have the thought, what if my tree falls into my house? Would that be obsessional? No. Why?
It might actually happen.
Why might it happen?
You saw the roots coming out.
Not because it's possible, but because I saw the roots coming out of the ground. Yeah, very true. So what we're trying to say is that we have something from our senses that would tell us something about the trees and something about the risks. Yes? I'll take you on another ride for another story. You can read this here for now, so we really get a good chance to get lost inside of this. About 6 months ago, I went to my doctor for a standard routine preventative medicine checkup. And they do the standard things. They're 30 minutes late for my appointment. I'm sitting in a room full of people coughing at a healthcare clinic. And I go in and the nurse says, stand on the scale. And the numbers are much higher than I'd like them to be. And I said, can I take my shoes off? Maybe that takes off a pound or 2. And then they sit me in this room and they say, put this on. And it's a gown that's supposed to be big enough for me. It's not. It's a little comical and embarrassing. And I sit there in my underwear And then the doctor comes in and does all the doctor things, like checks my blood pressure and says, wow, that's a little high. And I say, like I tell you every year, I have white coat syndrome. I'm sure it's in the file. They're like, oh, hon, there's nothing to be scared of here. Thanks. That's not how this works. And as she's feeling around my neck, doing things I don't understand, she goes, uh-oh. That's not supposed to be there. And I say, what's that? And she takes my hand and she brings it up and she puts it onto my neck and she says, do you feel that? I say, yeah. She goes, it's a bump. Yeah. That's not supposed to be there. Oh, well, this changed. You know, we were doing so well. I didn't even think this was a thing I'd have to worry about. So I said, what does that even mean? She says, we'll do some blood work. Many people have heard that before. Just do some blood work. That's reassuring. And also we'll take a biopsy. It's simple, better safe than sorry, simple little thing. We'll know a lot more in a week. So I'm just going to write this little piece of paper. You're going to go see the person. They're going to do a little numbing. They're going to stick a little torture device in there. They're going to pull out some of your skin. And they're going to send it off to a pathologist at a local hospital. In about 7 days, we're going to know. And I say, know what? Know if this is cancerous or not, which I'd already concluded was a possibility. How many people here would have concluded the same thing? Yeah, good. That tells you know what a biopsy means. Why else take a biopsy? Right? A lump, a biopsy, a doctor saying, that shouldn't be there. That's a normal doubt, if you wouldn't mind. And then you can hit again. Keep going. Maybe one more. Let's stop there. No, go back. It's weird, right? Not sympathetic. So all of this happened. All of us would have concluded the same thing, and that's not OCD. Right? That's normal life. That's what you should conclude. We don't treat this. Now, while I'm waiting 7 days, what shouldn't I do?
Google.
Yeah, I shouldn't Google, because what's going to happen? Yeah. I'm going to have Lou Gehrig's disease and cancer, right? Maybe POTS. I don't know how that got thrown in there, but it's in there. Right? What else shouldn't I do? I shouldn't call up all of my friends
Ask for
who are
reassurance.
paramedics.
Right.
Don't ask for reassurance.
Don't ask for reassurance. I might ask for a little bit of reassurance. Don't imagine your funeral. Right? Be like, I'm 41. I shouldn't have to be planning for my funeral. But what kind of casket would I want? Don't do that. So fundamentally, I have to tolerate something. What's that called?
Uncertainty.
Just mute the microphone. Yeah, you have to tolerate uncertainty. This is normal uncertainty. It's normal doubting. This is what we all know very well, and how we all know how to help our clients tolerate uncertainty, which is usually, in this case, time limited. What if I get cancer and die one day? Maybe not be time limited, but this has a timestamp on it, because in about 7 days we'll find something out. So in that meantime, I have to tolerate not knowing. I have to shift my attention onto the present moment. I have to work with clients, not plan my funeral, or say my goodbyes, or wonder what chemotherapy is like. And in 7 days, I get my results. And the results read, well, they show up on my chart. And the doctor says, don't read your my chart. So we all read our my chart. And we Google what these little numbers mean. I mean, not just me. So the results come back, and they say my name, my date of birth, and my doctor's name, and the person who took the biopsy, and then the pathologist who examined it. And somewhere down this bottom thing it says benign, sample benign. But instead of sighing relief and dancing on the table and celebrating, I say, but what if they switch my labs? You know, it happens. It's not impossible. Doctors literally have to write, not this they've been sued for operating on the wrong leg. If you can operate on the wrong leg, you can screw up my lab results, pathologists or people. Then people get broken up with and have bad night's sleep and are disorganized. And so maybe my pathologist was one of these unlucky people who just got their stuff mixed up. And I really do have cancer, despite these results, because, they could be someone else's results. So I really think it makes sense to go back and get another biopsy. Right? How many people have heard some version of that story? What's the difference between the conclusion and the doubt of the first column and the conclusion and the doubt of the second column?
I said life and
Yeah, the first one seems to be really important, the second one seems to be kind of silly. The part that we as therapists go, I don't know, something hinky about that story. But I could spend an hour telling you all the different reasons why it's not hinky. My father, who's on heart medication, and his 80, got prescribed the wrong pills by the doctor, pills that could have killed him. That's a real story. And if my mom hadn't caught it, he could have been dead. Pharmacists make errors. Humans are humans. Humans make errors. This is a flawless argument, but my biopsy is not mine. Flawless. I should get another biopsy, right? No. Should I tolerate not knowing if these are my results? Maybe, but I don't think we need to, because they are your results and you have no reason to think otherwise. Now, if the name on the chart said, Doug Phillips and not Michael Heady, and said you were born in 1962, maybe I'd want to think these aren't my results, but that wasn't there. The results were normal. Everything about the chart was normal, except for my conclusion. And this is why paying attention to the story matters. Not just the conclusion of the story, how I built it up. How did I get myself into this mess in the first place? And how did I bring my therapist into this mess with me? Right? Co-compulse with me. Right? So when this is a made-up story, this never happened. That's true, I just lied to you. Isn't it interesting how stories can feel so real? So the case of cancer and what could be. And we come up with a dozen examples, but this is my go-to example for people to help you understand that there is normal doubting. And that people with OCD do normal doubting. Right? And that's completely reasonable to help them understand that I think you're overreacting. I think you're underselling yourself on your resources to deal with the uncertainty that you will eventually get answers to, right? But the second part is so very different when we look at it in comparison to the first. Because most of us wouldn't have come to the conclusion that I should get a new biopsy result. Most of us would have celebrated and felt better. But people with OCD, especially health OCD, they would absolutely not. So do we have any questions up until this point? Because we're moving into another section, and I'm happy to take one or two questions that people may have.
How do you feel that people's personalities are related to what happens in the right now?
Can you say more?
Well, like having an obsessive compulsive personality. Just want to be sure. I always check things twice. Certain people have almost OCD.
Yeah, the perfectionism is sort of transdiagnostic, right? We see it in a ton of different disorders. I certainly think, you might get someone who might have a lighter commitment or investment in the story, and they wouldn't be OCD. Like, it's possible to switch to that, but what's for lunch, right? I think when you're looking at OCD in particular, you're looking at the investment in that story, and that's fairly diagnostic. So people with OCPD can look like OCD, but I don't know that it's as disturbing of a story. And I don't know that it's always false. But we can unpack OCPD at the end, because it's a very different animal that we're looking at, despite its unfortunate name. Any other questions?
I was wondering if, say if like a client has other people in their lives who have like real health issues and are sort of directing that towards themselves, like how do you validate, but also try to steer them in a direction that's not where they are, but where other people in their lives are?
So if I'm coming at it from an ICBT standpoint, and I'll restate your question in case the others didn't hear it, which is what if the person who has this kind of OCD has people in their sphere, their life, who are dealing with serious health issues? How do you help them sort of stay in the what's real and what's happening to me lane versus what's happening to my friend lane? And we get into this in later modules of ICBT, in particular module 2, where we actually let the OCD tell us its reasons, why this conclusion sounds so reasonable. So we let the OCD speak in its own voice. We don't try to filter it through what the client thinks it should be saying, just what's it saying, give me all your reasons. And one of those reasons will be out of context facts, right? Irrelevant, out of context facts. My friend's going through cancer treatment. Yeah, and your friend also won the lottery 6 months ago. What does that have to do with your chances of winning the lottery, right? But we don't debate it in that moment. We just gather the data, we gather the argument that the OCD is making, and when we move into a later modules 5 and 6, we actually put those reasons into a context. We say, okay, those are reasons, but are they the reasons, do they mean what you think they mean? Right? You think it means that you're at a higher risk of having cancer, or that it's reasonable for you to be concerned about this, but does it really mean that? So we contextualize, and we help the client understand that there's a big difference between normal doubting and obsessional doubting. We're going to unpack that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But yet, out of context facts, personal experiences.
I have a question. Someone who was an OCD, all this like makes sense from like the conceptual side, like this is irrational, this is not irrational. The problem I feel like is when anxiety starts spiking and you really can't feel the difference between the irrational and non-rational. So you would recommend like trying to like tame your anxiety before starting to look at the story so that you can actually see it more clearly and say this is what I should be doing, this is what I'm not doing, because I feel like once the anxiety's in, it's like you're hijacking everything.
Those are great questions. So I can restate that for people who didn't hear it, which is what if you have really, really high anxiety, and by the time you get to all of this, it happens so fast, you're immersed in the anxiety, you can't see through it. Is that a fair summary?
Everything feels distorted. When your anxiety's low, you can see the difference. This is my OCD versus this is what's reasonable and rational. But when anxiety's like hijacking you, you can't see that difference. So
Yep.
I'm wondering how to just like see that.
So I have 3 responses, and they're all going to feel a little bit unsatisfying. One is, the goal of ICBT is to slow you down. OCD wants to speed you up. We want to slow you down and see it coming. So by the time we get to the place where we're actually helping you decide, is this obsessional or is this not? Ideally, we've slowed you down. We've helped you look at something and slowed yourself down and get curious about what's going on. We've applied this to OCD that isn't yours. We call it off-theme work. We've applied it to OCD that's less provoking for you if you have more than one presentation of OCD. So by the time we get to this stuff that's super immersive and scary, you've slowed yourself down, ideally. That's my first response. My second response is it's absolutely reasonable for a person who scores really high in the anxiety sensitivity index, who's prone to panic attacks, who might get lost inside of what it means that their heart is racing and that they're sweating. There's a lot of misappraisals and faulty beliefs about the anxiety sensations themselves. Interoceptive exposure is amazing. And you might need to take a few sessions to do that if that makes sense for your individual client. It's not required for all clients, but it's even talked about in the manual as something that might need to happen. Yeah. And there was a third response, and I completely forgot what it was. But it was a perfect answer. And it might come to me later. I'm not going to take any more questions because I want to move on to the next slide. Thank you. There you go. You can put that up there. Those are my bad graphics. So obsessional versus normal data. There are ingredients, there are ways of understanding what is obsessional and what is normal. And part of the learning by CBT as a therapist as well as the client learning is really drawing a clear distinction between these two things. We spend a decent amount of time helping our clients pull these apart because we can't really get you to the latter part of treatment without knowing these differences. So normal doubting has certain qualities and ingredients. It arises from objective and relevant sensory information or common sense right here, right now. Anytime the brain is going, what about there and then? Something came before that to make you wonder about there and then. You're inside of consequences. So when a client says, what about there and then? You want to think consequences. And what set up the person to go into those consequences? The doubt came before the consequence. What was the doubt that made the consequence feel real, feel relevant? So in the normal circumstance, I do see the tree swaying, and I do see the roots coming up. I see it, right? In a normal doubt, I really did have a bump the doctor thought could be cancerous, and they really did take a biopsy, and they really did analyze the biopsy. Those things came first. I didn't walk into my doctor's office imagining a lump, thinking it might have been cancerous. It was a blank slate, so to speak, and then it arose. Normal doubt shows up in this sequence, typically. It doesn't require justifications. OCD only lives if we continue to justify it, right? So when we're justifying OCD, we're justifying possibilities. Why do possibilities need to be justified constantly? Because by themselves they die. Possibilities are not relevant. None of us think possibilities are relevant. It's possible you could win the lottery if you just play, but no one actually puts a down payment on a Maserati because they spent $2 on a ticket, right? Because possibilities don't matter. In order for the possibilities to stay alive, we keep injecting them with justifications, desperately. That's how you have a sense that this isn't normal doubting. Because normal doubting requires zero justifications. My doctor says there's a lump on your neck and we're going to do a biopsy. I'm not like, let's come up with more reasons why this could be cancerous. Oh, I got plenty, right? So reality hits you right between the eyes. It doesn't require justification. And it can be resolved. Information and reality can resolve normal doubting. It might take time. Information will never resolve OCD. OCD will only pull you further and further into possibilities and further away from reality. So if we think of possibilities and reality standing next to each other, the further into possibilities you go, the further away from reality you get. And when we're trying to argue with OCD, when we're trying to get lost in justifications, you move further from reality, not closer to it. So it shows up in this sequence. There is a reality that we detect with our senses, whether that be a common sense shared knowledge, or from our five senses that make up reality as we know it. And then we interact with that with conclusions that are tentative, right? Maybe it isn't cancer. Maybe my tree won't fall. But it's a solid conclusion. Whereas obsessional doubting is a completely different animal. It arises from within, from our feared possible self, which we'll get into after lunch. It arises from within, and this is why we say it's imagined. Right? When we say imagine, we mean the faculty of imagination, a part of our brain that can conjure things that I don't see with my eyes, but I can imagine. We call that the faculty of imagination, living inside of hypotheticals, could-bes, maybes, what-ifs, and might-bes. These are all opposite of what is, right? So what if and what is are two very different places to be. An obsession of doubts will always be in what if, always be in possibilities. They lack objective, sensory, relevant here-now information. That's kind of a mouthful. And again, when working with clients, we spend a great deal of time helping them understand this language. What does it mean for something to be relevant? If my conclusion is I might have cancer, relevant means to that conclusion, right? So if my biopsy said everything was fine, and then I said, but what if it's not? And then I start justifying why it might not be, because other people get cancer and have their labs switched because it's possible, because doctors make mistakes. Doctors making mistakes isn't relevant to me having cancer. It's relevant to doctors making mistakes. So we help understand these processes. We get into the details. So relevant means to the conclusion that you arrived at about yourself or about the circumstance, here and now. OCD is always about here and now. It's not about there and then. OCD happens in moments. It's not 24/7. You get provoked or prompted in moments, maybe 1,000 times a day, but they're each discrete moments. So OCD is about here and now. How do we know that? Because you're performing compulsions here and now. And you're doing it because you feel like it's reasonable to do here and now, which means that there is some kind of issue that you think is here and now. So don't let OCD try to trick you into thinking it's about there and now. It's not. It's about here and now. The doubting occurred here. The situation that caused the doubting occurred here, and the compulsions occur here. So treatment occurs here. And again, obsessional doubting is desperate for justifications, reasons used to prop up this house of cards. When we help our clients realize that this story doesn't really hold water. If you blow on the house of cards a little hard, it falls apart. But if you keep going at it with justifications and trying to prop it up, it might withstand some heat. So this is a fundamental shift we're trying to help our clients make. Is this normal doubting or is this obsessional? And the great thing, I like many things about a CBT, or I wouldn't be up here talking about it, is that we don't presume. It's truly